Hey everyone, OneSpitten here with another Tactica video. So I'm calling this Magic 1.0 because it really focuses on a lot of pre-game thinking about your Magic phase. Specifically how to build your spellcasters, but really it's about some of the things to think about as you're putting together your list. I'd like to give credit to Loki to Trixta. These two Tactica videos are really a product of our conversations about various Warhammer strategies. So the way we're going to approach this is I'm going to talk about first the purpose of spellcasters. As with anything, I don't think there's one purpose or one way to do anything, but I think there can be some very helpful ways of thinking about what are different purposes you can have for your spellcasters and how might that decision affect how you build them and how many you take and things like that. I'm going to talk about magic levels as a way of thinking about spellcasters and how many magic levels you want to bring in your list. Then we'll talk about types of builds and some simple strategies for rolling for spells. So starting off, the purpose of spellcasters. I think a lot of especially new players, and not to pick on another gaming system, but a lot of 40k players, I think when they first start playing fantasy, they think that the purpose of their spellcasters is to win the game for them. They're going to build a list that is the magic phase is so powerful that there's nothing their opponent can do to stop it. They're going to obliterate their opponent's units from across the table, and there's nothing they can do about it. And I would say, if you're going to play like that, just don't. The purpose of spellcasting really isn't to win the game for you. If you're building a one-dimensional game, it's really not that much fun for anyone. It's too random, so you can't really justify that it's always going to win you the games. A lot of times it won't. The winds of magic just won't be in your favor. And so then you just win or lose based on a few relative few dice rolls. So I would say never depend on your magic phase. Your magic phase should support your overall strategy. So perhaps another way of thinking about the purpose for your spellcasters is an important part of your overall strategy. And when I say it this way, I mean you still want an aggressive magic phase. You want a powerful caster, but you're not trying to build it with those very unique combinations that make it over the top. There are a lot of parts of overall strategies. I listed a few here. When I build lists, a lot of times I'm thinking, how am I going to handle hordes? How am I going to get my leadership? Do I have combat hammers, combat anvils? Do I have a way to clear away chaff? Can I redirect? I mean, all those kinds of things are part of your overall strategy. And magic can be in there with them. Magic can perform some of those roles. For instance, a lot of times I think of magic as a way of helping out with otherwise unmanageable units. So when somebody brings just an uber Death Star, and there's just, you can't go toe to toe with it with anything you brought, magic gives you the possibility of doing that. It can whittle them down, it can provide key augments to your units or key hexes to that unit when you do get in combat. A lot of things like that. Ethereal units, especially with the new Vampire Counts book out, that is something I think every list needs to be able to handle. If you look at that picture at the bottom of the screen, that's when two very, very tiny units that were both ethereal charged a 50 strong gore unit horde. And because I couldn't do any wounds to it, they won combat. I failed my steadfast, ran right off the table. Magic can help shore you up against those kind of weaknesses. So there's magic spells you can whittle those units down, maybe take them out before they get to your lines or whatever. Beastmen don't have any shooting, so I like the spell of Beasts a lot because there's the Amber Spear, as well as a less powerful magic missile to give you some kind of shooting. If you look at the top, that's taken from a game when I turned my level 4 into looks like a dragon. It was actually a mountain chimera, and it had an absolutely devastating effect. My list wasn't built around it. I think I was doing just fine in the game without that happening, but when that happened, it just really just opened the game wide open. Another way of thinking about spellcasters, instead of being an integral part of your strategy, meaning you want them to get a lot of spells off and things like that, it could be you're thinking, you know what, I like my list without them. I think I can win the game as long as my opponent's magic phase doesn't ruin my plans. So then some people think in terms of, okay, well, I just want to bring a spellcaster just for magic defense. I want to invest as little as possible, and I just want to make sure that my opponent doesn't absolutely overwhelm me. So you bring a level 2 or level 4, you give them some kind of defensive arcane item, such as a Dispel Scroll or a +1 to Dispel Staff or something like that. And those you justify those points just to make sure that you're not giving the game to your opponent by not having any kind of magic defense. And lastly, another way to think about the purpose of spellcasters is don't. They're very, very expensive. And I think it's a very legitimate strategy to approach a game thinking, I'm not going to take any. I'll take my chances. Malorian uses this a lot. He basically, all the points you save allow you to load up on other phases of the game. And so if you have an army like Bretonia where you can take a ton of knights that are hard hitting, have great speed, they can be on the opponent probably by turn 2, then maybe you're not worried about your spellcasters. You can probably assassinate him through combat. You can get tied up with his units so he can't do direct damage spells on you. So it's not a bad philosophy. There is some risk involved, but for that risk, you get a lot of points that you can take other things with. Another thing to consider too is, you do get a fair amount of dispel dice every turn. So even though you're not getting the +2 or +4 to dispel, what that means is your opponent's gonna get a spell or two off every turn. But usually you have enough dispel dice that you can stop one key spell every turn. And so I'll talk about this more in my next Magic Tactica video, but you need to think about it, if it's with this strategy especially, that you're not going to stop all the spells. You're going to let a lot of little spells through, but you know their lore, you know which spells you need to stop when, and that's what you use your dispel dice for. And if you feel like you know that well enough, this is a very, very legitimate strategy. So let's talk about the magic levels and how many you might want to bring to a game. When we talk magic levels, if you bring a level 2 and a level 4, that's 6 magic levels. I think more is certainly not better. You're limited on the number of power dice, and so I was at a tournament last year and I saw somebody bring 4 or 5 Empire Wizards, and I was thinking, wow, look at all the points. I mean, you've got a variety of spells to choose from, but you don't have enough power dice to spread around, so you spent all those points, and a lot of it's not going to be used. So really, the number of magic levels you bring depends on your purpose. If you want it to be an important part of your strategy, then 6 might be a good rule of thumb, a good way to start thinking about it, which usually means you bring a level 4 and a level 2. And then you build them, usually if you want an important part of your strategy, you build them a little bit offensively, or maybe there's some other benefits there. We'll talk about that in a minute. If the purpose of your spellcasters, if it's defensive, then maybe you just bring, a single level 2 or a single level 4 and you let it be at that. I guess you could bring a couple level 1s if you wanted to give them some defensive arcane items, but what your purpose for them should influence this, how many magic levels you want. So the reason you want multiple levels or multiple casters, for one, every level or caster you have gives you more spells, which is nice. It's nice to have a variety so that when you're in a particular situation, you have the spell you need. It's a very expensive way to get those spells. I mean, you can get them and they're nice and they can be useful, but they're very, very expensive. If you bring multiple casters, and you give them the same lore, you can almost guarantee that you get a key spell on the specific spell caster. If for some reason that's important to your game plan, to have a certain caster have a certain spell, having multiple casters with the same lore allows you to do that. Alternatively, you can bring complementary lores. I was in a game recently, a Dark Elf player took a level 4 with Shadow and a level 2 with Death. With Death, he put her on a Dark Pegasus and flew her around the board assassinating characters, or trying to. It was a great strategy. I think if you do something like that, you need to be happy with the signature spell, because the level 2 can't be really picky about the spells they get except for that signature spell. But, if that works in with your overall plan, I think that's great. 2 level 4s, I think, is wasted. It's just, for that matter, a 4 and a 2 and a 2. If there aren't other benefits for taking the spellcasters, that's a lot of points on a limited number of power dice. And you're going to roll 3 for the Winds of Magic and not be able to use that stuff. And you very likely might get overwhelmed by your opponent because they have their points spent in a lot of other stuff. 3 level 2s would be a cheaper way to go than a level 4 and a level 2 if all you cared about were having all the spells. I don't think that's a really wise way of thinking about it, because usually all the spells doesn't really mean a whole lot. And if you go that strategy, those spells are harder to get off than if you just had a level 4. It can be a smart way to go if there's some other benefit for having multiple casters. And I'll talk about that more in a bit, but if there's like them bringing arcane items is important, then that would certainly be a route to go. I would say that level 1s are rarely worth taking. I don't know how many points most level 1s cost. I believe the Bretonnian Damsel is 85 points. And for 85 points, you get a spell and a +1 to cast and +1 to dispel. And for 35 more points, you can double it. So, bang for your buck, I think it's always worth upgrading to level 2. The only reason I can think of to spam level 1s is if you want to spam a signature spell that has a low casting value. If you took Lore of Shadow and a bunch of level 1s, yeah, that might be worth it. Or if you just had so many arcane items that really had a huge impact, then that might be worth it. So let's talk about types of builds for your spellcasters. You can build them for survivability. You can build them for casting. And the casting, especially if you fall under that purpose for your spellcasters is an important part of your strategy, you might want to consider number 2. You can build them for dispelling, which especially if your purpose is defensive in nature. And then you can build them for another benefit. And that's the one I tend to go for. I think for some reason it seems more effective for me. And it's more fun. But I think all of these are viable approaches to it. So for survivability, and I did this for the longest time, sometimes I still do, but the first thing you think of with your spellcaster is, I want to conserve these points, I'm going to give them a 4 up ward save. It usually costs me about 50 points to do that. If it's a level 4, that still leaves points left for other gadgets. You can still build them offensive or defensive, but that way if they miscast or something, you've got you can save on odds half of those wounds. If you find yourself doing that all the time, I would suggest force yourself to not do it a couple times and see if it works for you. Because there are some cons to doing it. One, that's a lot of points spent that may or may not even be worth it. For one, if you get your spellcaster into combat, there's a real good chance they're going to die anyway. You're only going to save half the wounds. In combat, you might be exposed to a lot more than that. If you're thinking that miscasts are what's going to kill your spellcaster, how many miscasts do you expect? I mean, really, if it's a Lord level spellcaster, you have 3 wounds usually. You can suffer 2 infinite force miscasts that give you a wound and still live. If you have a low level, you only have 2 wounds. You're talking more than 50% of the cost of that model is being invested into insurance that model might live. I'm not saying it's always wrong, and there are certainly some situations where I still do it, but it's worth considering not focusing just on survivability with them. Another approach to building a spellcaster is casting, because you want it to be an integral part of your game strategy. You want spells to go off, so you're going to give them offensive weapons. They increase your power dice. They increase your casting values. If you're taking a Lord level, you can get a pretty good arcane item that can do those things for you and still build for survivability. And that may be a smart combination there, because if you want to throw a lot of dice around, it is more likely that you're going to suffer a lot of miscasts, and that might prove important. So that's one thing to think about. You can build for dispelling. It's very similar. Now you just give them something that increases your dispelling values or increases your dispel dice. Maybe they take power dice away from your opponent. I think a scroll is a great value for the points. I try to take one in all my lists. It's not mandatory, but I usually do. If I were building purely for defensive purposes, I would probably consider taking a level 2 with the +1 to dispel rather than taking a level 3, because when you're dispelling, that would be the same effect with both of those builds, and the level 2 would be cheaper. So something to think about there. And fourthly, ways of building them, I'm very creatively calling the other benefit, but really it's a matter of, can your spellcasters bring things that provide a greater benefit, that if it affects multiple units or even one big unit or whatever, that might justify a lot of the cost of bringing the spellcaster. So can they perform multiple duties? A lot of times you'll notice I bring a prophetess, level 4 prophetess, and then a level 1 or 2 damsel in my Bretonnian lists. The damsel, one, she gives magic resistance to the unit, which is marginally helpful. She can bring a arcane item that gives the unit the same ward save that the knights have. And when she's in a 50 men-at-arm horde, that prayer icon is well worth the points. And I think justifies some of the cost of her points. Also, I like they both have Lore of Beasts. I try to get her to get the Transformation of Kadan spell, because then the threat of her casting that can help my level 4 get spells through a lot of times. And then I won't even try to cast it. I'll let my level 4 use all the dice, because I don't really care if the men-at-arms win a certain combat. So in my mind, she brings a lot of other benefits to the table. If it's just her, the 2 spells she brings, and her chance of getting spells off, I would not bring her at all. Because she can do these other things, I do bring her. Also, with my Beastman list, Brace Shamans can be great. If one brings the Herdstone, then everyone I bring after that, in addition to whatever benefits they bring me, everyone after that, if they stay within 6 inches of the Herdstone, gives me +1 power dice. That has a cumulative effect. I mean, that benefit alone maybe not justify the cost of that spellcaster, but they have other benefits too. They bring more spells. They're available to cast needed spells at certain times, and plus they give me +1 power die. A lot of times I'll have an item like the Chalice of Dark Rain that's not an arcane item. Any of my characters can take it, but my characters that are in combat have other things I need to give them. But if I have a spellcaster that's giving me +1 power die anyway because he's hanging around on the Herdstone, but he doesn't have the Herdstone, so I can give him the Chalice of Dark Rain, and what that does is it basically shuts down the shooting phase once a game for my opponent. That's a huge benefit to an army like mine that is fragile against shooting. Well, that has some synergy there that can be worth it. Another type of build is when I bring my prophetess, I usually do not build her for casting or dispelling. Well, that's not true, because a lot of times I'll give her Dispel Scroll, but that doesn't cost too many points. And then I just give her the Crown of Command. And if she has a lot of points left over, that's fine, I just won't spend them. The Crown of Command, because she's already protected, I don't need to build her for survivability. She has a decent ward save, she's in the middle of a bunch of knights. You can't attack her in combat until you've killed that whole unit around her. Boom, she makes them stubborn, and that makes that unit a lot tougher to deal with. So that's why I like this type of building spellcasters, when you can think of ways that there's some kind of synergy with the rest of your army list. And lastly, I want to talk about rolling for spells. I think experienced players may not benefit a whole lot from this section, but a lot of people I think haven't thought through this, and it can be useful. So all this technique really is if there's certain spells that you want, and especially if you want them on certain casters, what you want to do is have a level. I'm just using a level 4 and a level 2 just to be consistent with it. You want to have them both take the same lore, so that you're guaranteed, almost guaranteed, to gain access to all 6 spells in the lore. And the trick is, you just roll first for the caster that you don't care about. And what I mean by that is, if I'm saying if there's one spell you want on one caster, or really even 2 or 3 spells that you want on one caster, you roll the other caster first. So for instance, my prophetess is always on a horse in the middle of a bunch of knights. My level 2 or level 1 is always on foot, usually with men-at-arms. So let's say that I really want Transformation, which is the 6th spell, on my level 2. And I want that because 1, it's wasted on my level 4 because you can't cast it if you're mounted. And 2, that's really synergistic with the men-at-arms. It turns men-at-arms from being an anvil to being a very serious hammer unit. And my opponent can never know when they're going to make that switch. So what I do is I roll the level 4 first. If I get a 6, I swap it for the signature spell. If I roll multiple 6s, I trade all of them away for other spells, and the very last one, I trade that for my signature spell, so that in the end, she hasn't taken a 6. It looks something like this. Let's say she rolls a 2, a 3, a 3, and a 6. I take one of the 3s, I have to trade it out for something else, so I take the 4, whatever. And the 6, I trade for the signature spell. So then when my level 2 goes to roll, the only things available are 1, 5, and 6. There's always a signature, but that's not the point here. My point is, I'm trying to get 6 on her, right? So she rolls 2 dice. If I roll a 6, if I roll any double, if I roll a duplicate of a spell already taken, which by the way is 2, 3, and 4, then boom, she has transformation. The only way she doesn't get it is if I roll 2 dice and I roll exactly a 1 and a 5. And trust me, that's happened to me before. But nevertheless, most of the time, you get the spell you want. Let's swap it around. Let's say that I'm taking Lore of Beasts with both of them. I want my level 4, the one that's mounted. I want her to have the Curse of Honor here because it's a great spell. It's a relatively low casting value. I want her casting it every turn with the weight of her +4 to cast behind it. So it doesn't matter what the spell is. Let's say that's what you want. I mean, if you're a Dark Elf player, you'd probably want to have the Occam's Mind Razor on your level 4, whatever. So I roll the level 2 first. If I roll a 4, I just swap it out for the signature spell. If I don't roll a 4, I would very seriously consider not taking the signature spell because that will guarantee that my level 4 gets the spell that I want. Regardless, if you roll both 4s, you trade one away, and then you swap the last one for the signature spell. It looks something like this. Let's say you roll double 4s. The worst thing possible when you just don't want the level 2 to have the 4. You trade one of them for another spell, let's say 5. You trade the remaining 4 for the signature spell. Then your level 4 goes to roll. The only options available are 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. She has 4 dice. If she rolls a 4, if she rolls any double, if she rolls a duplicate of a spell that level 2 already has, any of those things at all, she gets the spell that she wants. So the only way not to get it is if you roll a 1, 2, 3, and 6 exactly. And that has happened to me before, but usually it doesn't. But what if you want multiple spells on this caster? Obviously, the pickier you get, the harder it is to accomplish. When I first started, when the 8th came out and I was taking Lore of Life on my spellcasters, Lore of Life is wonderful if you give it to a Slann who can take all the spells in the lore. But when you have it on a Bretonnian prophetess who can only take 4 spells, it's not nearly as good because Lore of Life works with synergy. Throne, which makes other spells better and which protects you from miscasts, is great, but it's not great by itself. And some other spells are okay, but not nearly as good as they are with the Throne. So my initial thought was, I want Throne, I want the toughness buff, I want the regrowth, and I want Dwellers all on my level 4. Well, that's really tough. It's really tough to get exactly the 4 spells you want. So in trying to find solutions to that, I said, well, tell you what, how about I take my Dwellers and put that on my level 2? That way, if she gets Dwellers off and miscasts, it's worth it. So I'll just let her do that. But, the toughness buff and regrowth, I really want combined with the Throne of Vines. I really want those spells with my level 4. Now, by the way, I'm not saying that's the best way to go. I'm giving one scenario that might cause somebody to want multiple spells. So you roll the level 2 first. As long as she doesn't roll 2 of the 3 spells that you're trying to get on your higher level caster, which in this case are 2, 3, and 5. If she just rolls 1 of them, then you just trade it for the signature spell. So let's say she rolls a 1 or a 2. 2 is one of the ones you want for your higher level caster. So you keep the 1. You trade 2 for the signature spell. Your level 4 goes to roll. She has 4 dice. She wants 2, 3, and 5. And 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are the only ones available. She has 4 dice. Again, any double. I mean, it's very, very, very likely that you can get all 3 of the spells you want. It's not 100% guaranteed, but most of the time you'll be able to get it. 4 spells are tough. 2, 3 spells, I don't know what the odds are. My guess is 65%. 2 spells is very, very doable. But by taking, if it's important that you have a certain spell and a certain caster, have them both take the same lore, and it's very much more likely you can get them the spells you want where you want them. So that's it for Magic 101. Just to review, this is all thinking that goes into your building your spellcasters before the game begins. I'm really kind of advocating that you put some thought into what's the purpose of your spellcasters, what are you trying to do with them, and then think through the different issues of how you can accomplish that. And don't do things just because you see other people doing them or because you've always done them a certain way. Anyway, that's it. Hope you enjoyed it.